Good evening again and welcome. My name is Paula Hallam. I'm a registered specialist paediatric dietitian, and I'm going to be talking this evening about plant-based nutrition for children. I'm going to be focusing mainly on under fives, but really happy to take questions about any age children to do with their nutrition. And just wanted to start off by telling you a little bit about myself. So I've been a pediatric dietitian for almost 25 years now. I'm a mum to two teenage girls. Worked in the NHS for 18 years in a huge variety of different roles. And most recently, I worked in food allergy research, also consulted to various charities, and I provide expert advice to baby food companies as well. So as well as my dietetics qualifications, I also have an additional qualification in pediatric dietetics and have from the University of Plymouth, and have also undertaken the plant-based nutrition course at the University of Winchester. So welcome again, everyone. Really looking forward to the session this evening. Tonight, what I'm going to be covering is I'm going to be talking a little bit about why talk about this particular topic. As Rahini said, it's often in the media in sort of a negative light. So just wanted to sort of put that into context a little bit. And then I'm going to be talking about various nutrition considerations when we're talking about plant-based eating to do with children. So looking at their growth, and obviously we're wanting to ensure that children have adequate and optimum growth. I'm going to be talking a little bit about introducing animal-based allergens, so food allergens. This is a question I get asked a lot from families. Then I'm going to be looking at really key nutrients for young children, and I'm going to be sharing a case study with you to illustrate that, and then I'll be talking about supplements as well to consider, and also sharing some resources that I think are really helpful for families. Okay, so why talk about plant-based? Of course, you're all really interested in this topic. We know that there's a lot more interest in it. In 2021, a survey found that 1 in 4 British people had reduced their intake of animal products, and January 2024, so just finished this year, broke all previous records, and over 1.8 million people signed up worldwide. So it's absolutely amazing that is happening. But I think for parents and for families, it can be quite they can be quite unsure if this way of eating is appropriate for their children. Often they have lots of questions, understandably, and I think there's a lack of guidance and support available for families out there. So I hope with my platform, Plant-Based Kids, to help support families with more guidance and information about plant-based nutrition and children. So we know from the British Nutrition Foundation that plant-based diets are dietary patterns that have a greater emphasis on foods derived from plants. And of course, when we talk about plants, we're not just talking about fruit and vegetables, we're also talking about whole grains, pulses, nuts, seeds, and oil, so encompassing all of those. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a diet based only on plants, although that is, of course, totally possible. And I support families who want to raise their children 100% plant-based, or want to sort of start including more of these plant-based foods in their family's eating pattern. I also think it's important to remember that not all plant-based diets are equal. I think we all know this, that the overall quality of the diet is really, really important, and not just sort of labeling it as a particular way of eating. So firstly, I wanted to talk about the growth of children following plant-based diets. So often in the media, you hear sort of negative things about children and children's growth, but actually the research shows that so earlier studies, for example, the Farm study and the Seventh-day Adventist children study, so those were done in the late 80s and early 90s, looking at children following vegan and vegetarian diets compared to children following omnivorous diets. And they found that really the children grew very, very similarly to omnivorous children. There has also been some more recent research. So the Vici study, which was a study undertaken in Germany, looking at over 400 children. And they looked at a group of vegan children, vegetarian children, as well as omnivorous children. So 3 groups of children, and there were over 100 children in each of those groups. And they found that the vegan as well as the vegetarian diets provided sufficient energy and nutrients for adequate growth, and that the children's growth was similar to the omnivorous children. They did point out that a small percentage of the vegan and vegetarian children didn't grow quite as well as the other children, the omnivorous children, but in all of those cases, they found that the children were not having sufficient calories to optimize their growth and development, and they had extended breastfeeding without the introduction of appropriate complementary foods. So it's really important that we make sure that children are getting enough calories and energy. And I'm going to illustrate that in the case study that I'm going to share with you. So this is taken from the Vici study. And so you can see it in the graphs looking at, on the left, weight for height, and on the right, height for age. The vast majority of children, the vegan and vegetarian children, grew very, very well, very similar to omnivorous children. There were just a small percentage in the vegetarian and vegan group that their height for age wasn't quite as good as the omnivorous group. But as I said previously, in all of those cases, they discovered that their energy intake wasn't as adequate, and that was the reasoning behind it. You can also see that in the left-hand graph that in the omnivorous group, there were more children who tended to be in the overweight and obese category compared to the vegan and vegetarian children. So we know that vegan and vegetarian children tend to have less of a risk in terms of developing obesity or overweight later in life. Okay. So I wanted to touch on introducing allergens because this is a huge topic. So talking about allergy prevention, and something that families understandably ask very often, and it's quite a nuanced sort of topic. So we know from a lot of research that has been done in the last 8 years or so that introducing food allergens, particularly peanuts and to a lesser extent eggs, to babies within their first year of life may help prevent allergies to those foods from developing later in life. So the most evidence, the most research we have is for peanuts. So the LEAP study, which is learning early about peanuts, and that's what LEAP stands for, they found that an 80% reduction in peanut allergy in a group of high-risk children. So those children had either eczema, early onset eczema, or an existing food allergy. So they were considered an existing egg allergy, sorry. So they were considered a high risk group of children in terms of high risk for developing peanut allergy. And they found an 80% reduction in peanut allergy in the group of babies and children that had been fed the peanut products compared to the ones that had avoided peanuts. But of course, for plant-based families, I think in terms of introducing allergens, 4 of the top 9 food allergens are animal-based. So it throws up lots of questions in terms of should I introduce these? If I do introduce them, how much do I give? How often do I give it to them? How long do I need to continue it? So it does throw up a lot of questions, which I think is worth thinking about. So we know that any food in theory could cause a food allergy, but there are these top 9 food allergens, which I've specified here on in this diagram. So dairy products and cow's milk, egg, wheat, soya, peanuts, tree nuts, sesame, fish, and shellfish. So those are what we call the top 9 food allergens, and they are responsible for around about 90% of the food allergies that we see in young children. So things, there's no sort of definite answer here. It's very nuanced, but I think some things to think about and consider when you're thinking about whether you should introduce these food allergens or not are these are some considerations. So what is your child's food allergy risk factors? So I'm going to come on to that in the next slide, and so I'll come back to that. Another consideration, which I think is really, really important, is continued exposure. Is this realistic for your family? So, for example, if you are introducing egg, for example, it's not enough to introduce that just sort of once or twice, and then, okay, great, tick, my little one doesn't have an egg allergy. That once that food is introduced, it needs to be offered on a regular basis. So the recommendations are at least once a week, and continued for a number of years. We don't know exactly how long it needs to be continued for, but I think it's important. It's a good idea to consider. If I introduce that food, it's not enough to just introduce it sort of once or twice. It needs a continued exposure. And is that realistic or achievable in a particular family? Another consideration, I think, is the likelihood of coming into contact with different allergens. So something like milk and egg, a child might come into contact with fairly easily at a birthday party, for example, or the birthday cake that might be around, versus something like fish or shellfish, which is much easier to avoid. I just wanted to come back to the food allergy risk factors. So considering your little one's risk of developing a food allergy, I think is an important consideration. So we know that babies who have severe eczema, particularly if it's early onset, so before around 4 months of age, and babies who have an existing food allergy, we know that those babies are likely to benefit the most from the early introduction of some of the food allergens, particularly peanuts and egg. And but it's recommended that a health professional support is needed in that case. So then in the orange or sort of a yellow category, children who have mild to moderate eczema, or babies who've got a history of atopy, so allergies in the family, for example, allergies, asthma, or hay fever in a first-degree relative. It's recommended to introduce the allergens from around 6 months, and so not sort of any different to what is defined here as sort of the general population or all other babies. I think it's also important to recognize that no infant is without any risk. So we can't sort of say no risk. There's sort of standard risk to highest risk. But we do know that children with the highest risk are those with severe eczema or an existing food allergy. So I think those things will hopefully be helpful to families when they are thinking about whether to introduce these allergens to their little ones, to their infants or not. And also just to say again that the most evidence we have is for peanuts, which obviously is a plant-based food. So we have the most evidence in terms of allergy prevention for peanuts. Okay, so it's quite a nuanced sort of discussion and sort of topic. So I hope that gives a little bit of sort of background and context to introducing allergens. Really happy to take any questions that anyone may have. Okay, so wanted to move on to talk about sort of key nutrients for young children. I'm going to be taking you through a case study to sort of illustrate these key nutrients. Just want to say that this is a fictional case study. The child's name has been changed, and also I've used sort of various case studies that I've seen over the years and sort of put them into one case study. So this child is not someone that exists with all these different scenarios, but I'm trying to illustrate how by looking at these certain nutrients through this case study. So just to say that. So this fictional case study is a boy called Jack, 3 years, just over 3 years of age, and his parents follow plant-based diet, which they've chosen to do for environmental and health reasons. So he was breastfed until 2 years of age. Complementary foods, so solid foods were introduced at 6 months of age. And then the parents from 2 years of age, when he stopped breastfeeding, they started making an almond milk as from at home as a dairy alternative drink. And they also offered him soy yogurt, which is an organic soy yogurt. And they included things like lentils once or twice a day as a protein source. But they stayed away from nut butters, as the parents were really, really afraid of nut allergies, had heard really awful stories about peanut allergy, and so they decided not to introduce nut butters. And they also didn't include any vitamin and mineral supplement, because they didn't feel that was necessary, their child needed that. They did also comment that their child was often lethargic, and they thought he looked pale. Okay, so yeah, just to reiterate again, it's a fictional case, and I've seen these things in different children, but not necessarily all in one child. So this fictional character, Jack, this is his growth chart. So you can see that both his sort of weight and height are starting to drop off. And so I'd be looking at his growth and just be a bit concerned that his weight and height are dropping off there. I'd also be questioning his iron status. Does he perhaps have iron deficiency anemia if his parents are saying he's lethargic and pale? So in this case, I would probably investigate and test his iron status. And another thing to mention is that he's not having a vitamin and mineral supplement. So we do recommend that all children, regardless of their eating pattern in the UK, we recommend vitamins A and D. So at the very minimum, I would expect him to be on that. And of course, in this case, a vitamin B12 supplement as well. So looking at his intake, I obviously looked at the dietary intake, and I would look at the food intake in more detail. His fat intake was quite low. And so I would be worrying or concerned that maybe he has an inadequate calorie intake. No nut butter, so they weren't really including many sort of fat-rich, energy-rich foods. And the almond drink is a very, very low calorie drink for a young child. And then also thinking about the calcium intake, that would likely be quite low in this case. The soy yogurt's unfortified, and a homemade almond drink would also be unfortified. So be a bit, I would be definitely sort of investigating that and considering his calcium intake. Okay, so just to illustrate the sort of important nutrients to look at. So the first thing I would be talking to parents about is calcium. So I would recommend opting for a calcium fortified alternative drink instead of one that's homemade, and also using a fortified soy yogurt. Foods like calcium set tofu, incredibly rich source of calcium. So that would be another really good option to include in his eating pattern. And then including other foods that are also really naturally high in calcium would be a great idea as well. So some of the green vegetables, for example, broccoli, kale, spring greens, pak choi, things like that are great sources of calcium. Although I think it is important to recognize that toddlers are likely not going to be eating very large portions of those vegetables. And so although they can contribute to the calcium intake, they won't necessarily be providing a large amount in terms of the calcium intake. And foods like oranges, tahini are also great sources of calcium as additional sources. So these are the amounts of calcium that young children, as well as breastfeeding women, need. So a child of this age would need 350 milligrams a day, a 3-year-old child. So that's what I'd be looking to at least meet that requirement in this child. There are a huge number of dairy alternative drinks in the supermarket. I feel like every time I go to the supermarket, almost there's a new one out there. So I think it can be extremely confusing for parents, seeing this huge array of different dairy alternative drinks and wondering which type to use. So I always talk to parents about looking for a drink that is fortified, and also looking at the energy and protein content of the drinks as well. So we know that things like nut-based drinks and coconut-based drinks can be very, very low in calories. So better to opt for either a soya-based, pea-based, or an oat-based drink in terms of the calories. And then in terms of protein, soya and pea-based drinks are usually the best in terms of protein content. And then looking for a drink that's fortified with calcium and vitamin D as a sort of minimum. And then additionally, vitamin B12 and iodine would be good additions to have as well in terms of fortification. So in the research, we know that calcium intake in children can be on the lower side in vegan and vegetarian children. So the Vici study found that the vegan children had the lowest calcium intake. So I think it is definitely something we need to consider and be aware of. A study in Poland also found that vegan and vegetarian children had lower bone mineral content, although that was mostly explained by the fact that they had a smaller body size. And I couldn't find in this particular study the actual intake of the children's calcium intake, and also a third of them didn't take vitamin D supplements. So again, emphasizing how important it is to make sure that children are having enough in terms of calcium and vitamin D in terms of their bone health. So another aspect in terms of nutritional advice, I'd be looking at the child's protein intake, offering a source of protein at every meal. So I'm sure you all know this, that these are all examples of protein-rich foods. And then in terms of the dairy alternative drink, a soya or pea-based drink would be best in terms of protein intake. This is the amount of protein that children need. So children don't actually need very large quantities of amounts of protein. So a 3-year-old child would need about 15 grams of protein a day. But of course, we need to make sure that we are meeting that requirement at least. And again, the research shows that protein intakes are usually not a problem in all groups of children. So vegan children, vegetarian children, omnivorous children, all of those groups of children in the Vici study had more than twice the intake of protein than the reference value. So protein intake is not usually a problem. It's very easy to meet protein requirements eating a fully plant-based diet. And there is some research linking very high protein intakes, very high animal protein intakes in early childhood to overweight and obesity later in life. So we don't want to, in terms of omnivorous children or children who do include some dairy and meat, we don't want to we don't want them to necessarily have very high protein intakes either. Iron is a really, really important nutrient for critical nutrient for young children and babies. We know that they need quite a lot in terms of their body size, and iron deficiency is actually very, very common in toddlers, regardless of the eating pattern that they are having. So it's not specific to plant-based children. So important to make sure that we're including plenty of iron-rich foods. For example, legumes, tofu, edamame beans, nuts, seeds, and iron-fortified cereals are all good examples of iron-rich foods. And I always talk to parents about including one of those at every meal. So three times a day, every meal, as often as you can to try and include an iron-rich food at that meal, as well as including the foods that are rich in vitamin C and beta carotene, so basically all fruits and vegetables, because we know that vitamin C and beta carotene enhances the absorption of iron. So that's an important aspect as well. This is the amount of iron that children need. So you can see from around 7 months, it jumps up quite a lot. And that is because iron stores that babies are born with, full-term babies are born with, start running low from around 6 to 7 months of age. So, and breast milk doesn't contain very much iron. So we need to make sure that we are providing an additional source of iron in terms of the foods that we're offering to children. So just quickly, in terms of the research on iron status. So as I said before, iron deficiency is the most common nutrient deficiency worldwide, and that's regardless of dietary intake. Studies have consistently shown that iron intakes are actually higher in vegetarian and vegan children compared to omnivorous children. But the studies on iron status varies quite a lot. Most studies report that iron deficiency, so a lower ferritin level, can occur in some vegetarian and vegan children, but they don't seem to have higher levels of iron deficiency anemia. And some research does suggest that there may be an adaptation in vegetarians to absorb more iron. But that research was done in adults, so we're not 100% sure if that occurs in children as well. The other thing that I would talk to his family about is fats and supporting the family to introduce nut butters. So we know a lot of plant-based foods can be naturally quite low in fats. So things like lentils, beans are quite low in fats, but of course nuts and seeds, so nut butters, seed butters, ground nuts are a great source of fats. And so I would definitely be talking to the family around safely introducing nut butters to this child. Education around plant-based sources of fats and the importance of fats as an energy source in young children. So because young children don't eat large quantities of food, we need to make sure that they have nutrient and energy dense meals so that they are having enough calories to support their growth. I would also, in terms of essential fats, I would recommend an algal oil DHA supplement to children from 1 year of age. And there are some resources out there in terms of the references I put below there for when you are talking to parents about different food groups and how to talk to them about different food groups. From a book, I have designed this little plant-powered little plate, which shows visually to parents how to sort of easily try and meal plan. And you can see there we've got nuts, seeds, and oils, beans, lentils, and soy foods. And then grains and starches, fruits and vegetables, and calcium-rich foods in the middle. So that hopefully gives parents a sort of a visual way of easily trying to plan their little ones' meals. Okay, and then just wanted to touch on lastly on supplements. So I would also talk to this family about supplements. I think there is this misconception with some parents that if your child eats, well, that they don't necessarily need supplements. But we know that for fully plant-based or predominantly plant-based children, a vitamin B12 supplement is really, really important. So I would definitely be emphasizing that. Iodine is another one to consider. So the only plant-based source of iodine really is seaweed. Which can contain very, very high amounts of iodine. So certain types of seaweed can contain really excessive amounts of iodine. And iodine is one of those nutrients where we want to make sure everyone's having enough, children are having enough, but equally we don't want children to be having too much either, because that can also cause thyroid problems. So iodine is important for the formation of thyroid hormones. And so too little is not great, but too much is not a good idea either. So we need to make sure that children are having enough. Some of the plant-based dairy alternative drinks are fortified now with iodine. So that's another consideration, how much they're getting from fortified foods. The Veg One baby and toddler liquid multivitamin and mineral from the Vegan Society is a really great supplement. It has vitamins A, C, and D, which are recommended for all children. And then in addition to that, it has vitamin B12, as well as selenium and iodine. So it's a great supplement, and it only contains a small amount of iodine. It doesn't contain the sort of the whole RNI that is recommended. So it sort of recognizes that children might be getting some iodine from fortified foods. So just to say that all children in the UK, Department of Health recommends all breastfed infants are supplemented with vitamin D from birth, and then from 6 months of age, vitamins A and D are recommended, and that's regardless of eating pattern, unless the baby is drinking more than 500 mils infant formula per day. So those are the currently recommendations. Vitamin C used to be in the recommendation as well, but it's just recently changed after a SACN report. So I think I have sort of mentioned most of this already, but we know these are the nutrients which I would be looking at possibly supplementing with children. So iodine, we know that the main source of iodine are dairy products and fish and shellfish. Eggs contain a small amount as well. Seaweed does as well, but as I said, that can contain excessive amounts. And we know that iodine intakes can be a problem in plant-based diets. The vegan children in the Vici study had the lowest intake, although it is worth mentioning that all groups of children, so the omnivorous group, the vegetarian group, and the vegan group, all had low iodine intakes. So it's not necessarily a nutritional problem just for plant-based children. The other children also had low intakes, although the vegan children did have the lowest. And then vitamin B12, as I mentioned before, we know that plant foods are not a reliable source unless they are fortified. So a supplement is recommended for all predominantly plant-based, for all those who are predominantly plant-based. And then DHA and EPA, the main sources in the UK diet are oily fish and some eggs, depending on what the hens have been fed. But if those foods are not included, algal oil supplement is recommended, particularly for children under the age of 2, and also for pregnant and breastfeeding women. Those seem to be the most vulnerable groups in terms of DHA. So that's just what I mentioned before. Those are the amounts recommended at different ages for those 3 supplements that I just mentioned. Okay, so I just wanted to finish off with a couple of recommended resources. So Plant-Based Health Professionals has an amazing set of resources for feeding babies. They're really detailed, really colorful, as you can see, and really, really helpful. So definitely recommend those. First Steps Nutrition has got a guide, Eating Well for Vegan Infants and Under 5s, which is really visual and has lots of these sort of images that I've shown here. I have got lots of free resources on my website if anyone wanted to get some more information and guidance there. And then, as Rahini mentioned, I have just published a book in December, which is a part nutrition guide, part recipe book, talking about all these different topics, different age groups, meal planning. It's really, really practical. So yeah, so I really hope you will check it out. And yeah, I'm really happy to take any questions.
Okay, amazing. I'm hoping this doesn't make you boot you out now, Paula,
Okay.
because Zoom is definitely misbehaving today. And thanks everyone. I think the chat should now be working. I'm just activating it so that you can have a bit more of a discussion. And I'll just paste the link to our kids area of our site. Paula, that was brilliant. Thank you so much. There was so many amazing practical tips in there, but also just made it really clear in terms of just being able to see how kind of calcium intakes, for example, differ as things go up. So like there's an increased need in that first year and then it slightly drops, and super helpful to see. And also to see how you need kind of the Goldilocks of certain nutrients when it comes to things like iodine, too much,
Yeah.
too little.
Yeah.
And I also really love the case study of the little boy, where sometimes as a society we can be quite fixated on being healthy, on being natural, on
absolutely, yeah,
or processed foods, and sometimes the media can be really confusing because some processed foods, as you point out in your book, can actually help children to meet their nutrient needs, whether it's plant-based drinks and yogurts and things like that.
Exactly.
So,
yeah. And I think it's just with some small changes, it can make a big difference nutritionally for children.
Completely agree. So let's kick off with the questions. I also have a couple of my own, but there's a lot of questions. And some of them are a little bit controversial as well. So that's good because I think it always gets
yes.
So one of the questions that came up was about plant-based drinks and concern over rapeseed oil in plant-based drinks. The person said that, you know, they've read that this is highly inflammatory to the body. What are your thoughts? Because if you do look on the back of most plant-based drinks, especially the ones that are fortified, which we do want for all the reasons you mentioned, they tend to have either rapeseed oil or vegetable oil of some kind.
Yeah, sure. Yes, so I do get a lot of questions from parents saying, is it okay? Like, I mean, as far as I'm aware, the evidence for rapeseed oil being inflammatory isn't very strong, and I wouldn't say that is a reason to sort of not use a plant-based drink, and certainly for children, they have quite a high requirement for fats, you know, particularly children who are under the age of 3. And so I think although low fat products might be appropriate for adults, the specific goals that they have in terms of their health, low fat products and low fat diets are just not appropriate for young children, and so so I would still be recommending plant-based drinks that have got a significant source of calories, and we know that the sort of nut-based and coconut-based ones tend to be very, very watery and very low in calories, which may be fine for adults, but for young children, we really need something that has got higher calories, and often that means having some fats in it, and so I don't think there's convincing evidence in terms of rapeseed oil being pro-inflammatory.
I completely agree. I think a lot of it is actually because so many ultra processed foods can be inflammatory and they happen to contain seed or oil, but that's kind of blaming the oils and not maybe the other components or lack of fiber and other issues with those foods. And exactly what Shireen said, there's no evidence that these oils are inflammatory, and actually have positive health benefits.
Yes, exactly. Actually, quite the opposite. They seem to be have health benefits as opposed to being inflammatory or anything like that. So
And just on that note, what are your thoughts about the concerns around emulsifiers and kind of gums, like sometimes gellan gum and things like that, and fortified plant-based milks? Should people be worried about that for their children and the impact on the gut microbiome?
Yeah, sure. I think this is a huge topic, and I think it's very confusing for people and especially for parents. I think that the ultra processed foods generally have been totally demonized, especially in the last few weeks in the media. It feels like it's everywhere, and not all ultra processed foods are the same. So wholemeal bread is definitely not the same as a really ultra processed I don't know, donut or cakes, or like really, really highly confectionery things. So and they all sort of tend to get lumped together. Similar with emulsifiers, they sort of all tend to get lumped together, that all emulsifiers are terrible. So I would say that the most important thing with a dairy alternative drink is we really want to be fortified. Children need calcium. They need a good source of calcium and vitamin D for their bone health. As far as I'm aware, things like gellan gums and some of the emulsifiers, things like lecithin and things, have not had any sort of adverse health outcomes linked to them. So I think emulsifiers and sort of additives in general have been sort of lumped together, and there isn't really convincing evidence that all of them have detrimental health effects. Some which you don't even get in plant-based dairy alternatives, things like polysorbate 80 and the sort of carrageenan and things which you can sometimes find in things like ice creams and things like that. There have been some studies, but they've mainly been in looking at the gut microbiome, but they've mainly been in animal studies, so it can't necessarily extrapolate. But I think the overall diet is really, really important, sort of hyper focusing on sort of one aspect of the diet. If a child is eating lots of plant-based foods, they're going to be having good sources of fiber. They're going to be having beans, lentils, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds in their diet, all really whole grains, is all really good sources of fiber. And yes, the dairy alternatives are a part of that, but they can support their nutrition as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so a few questions about formula and people who
okay, yeah.
about the best type of formula for completely vegan infants or children that are being raised on a totally plant-based diet. What is your recommendation when it comes to plant-based options for formula in the UK?
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't have time in the webinar to sort of talk about it, feeding really the smallest infants. So again, it tends to get demonized, but a soya infant formula is perfectly safe and healthy for infants to have. In the UK, we only have one brand of soya infant formula, which is SMA soya infant formula, which is actually not 100% vegan or plant-based. But it is 99%. So it's just the vitamin D source, which is sourced from lanolin in sheep's wool. So it's sort of the closest we have in terms of a plant-based formula. The NHS is still quite sort of precautionary in terms of their guidance on soya infant formulas, and they don't recommend it for infants under 6 months. But I think that's really overly cautious. There've been lots of systematic reviews, meta-analysis, these huge studies looking at lots and lots of other studies showing that really there aren't any health concerns in terms of soya infant formulas when you compare it to cow's milk formulas. I'm hoping that sort of advice, that sort of precautionary advice, is going to be really reviewed, because in many other countries of the world, they use soya infant formulas a lot more than we do. I was looking at something just earlier, and 25% of infants in the US, and I think it's similar in Canada, about 20% are fed with the soya infant formula, and there have not been any problems. We know that in Asian countries they use soya infant formula a lot, so I don't think that there are any sort of significant health problems, and they definitely they really seem to be safe. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think I'm hoping that they will sort of reevaluate that and hopefully not too long. Let's hope.
Yes.
And there's so many questions, so just doing my best to get through it. There's a great one from another dietitian who's working in public health and wishes to increase the intake of plant-based meals in schools within the school food standards. One of the big challenges that this person says is that children can be reluctant to try new foods and textures. So for those who are having school meals, that might mean that they don't meet some of their nutritional needs and could be at increased risk of deficiency. So, for example, instead of a beef burger, if they're serving a bean burger, do you have any thoughts on making changes to foods to encourage children who might be more reluctant to eat plant-based foods if they're
Oh, that's such a brilliant question, and so such an important role that person has in schools and trying to change the foods that are on offer there. I think with children, it's all about what they're familiar with. So, if children and their families don't really eat, beans or lentils or something at home, and then they see it at school, they might think, oh my gosh, what is this? So I don't know if they have the facilities at that particular school. Some schools do, some don't. But to try and have like a class or something where they can make something together in a class, if they have that facility available, because we know that if children are a help with the preparation of foods, if they're involved in cooking, or even if they're just involved in planning meals and things, that they're more likely to sort of want to try it, and if they've been involved in preparing it. So I think trying to include some sort of activity where they help with preparing foods, or maybe bringing in different foods from home, making them more familiar with these foods, would mean that they would be more likely to try them.
Totally. No, I love the idea of kind of getting children involved. And I will say that your book has some really lovely recipes, and your Instagram page as well, kind of just, vegetables and muffins, having like just more finger foods that children really enjoy. So I think it's
exactly.
Children obviously eat with their eyes as well, don't they? And
definitely. And all the recipes are sort of quite simple. So if you wanted to make them together with a child, I know it's always super messy, but it's always, beneficial to involve children in preparing foods, definitely.
Okay, great. So next question, I think this is a really cool question. It's about dark chocolate. Is dark chocolate suitable for children? And if so, at what age and percentage of cocoa solids exactly?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. I don't think I've been asked that before. I mean, just thinking off the top of my head now, we do know that dark chocolate has caffeine in it, doesn't it? So I guess we need to be aware of that. And depending on the level of the cocoa solids, it'll have sort of more or less sugar. So I would say probably over the age of around 3 or so, just thinking about the caffeine content and maybe like a couple of blocks, but I think it's fine to include, and you could include it in some recipes, like some muffins or biscuits or something like that, as an option.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess it totally depends on the child as well. Some children are really more sensitive and prone to overstimulation as well, and maybe the time of day maybe the best for kind of moving off to bed. That's such a good question. And there was an interesting point about growth. Is being smaller really that bad? That in Chinese thinking, that they believe there's some disadvantages in being big and tall. Is big really better? I suppose we know that for adults that, being very, very tall can increase your risk of cancer and things, and obviously because of the IGF-1. What are your thoughts on that for children, and when it comes to the focus sometimes on height and growth charts?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a very fair point that being half a centimeter or even less shorter, is that really an issue? Probably not. And I mean, obviously, depending on your parents, your parental height, there's going to be genetics involved there as well, but I think they did account for that. But a lot of the things in the studies, it's debatable what that sort of clinical relevance is in terms of a child being, as like half a centimeter or something like that shorter, and whether that's really relevant. So really, really good point. Whether it's, even really matters in the sort of grand scheme of things. And I think in some of the studies, they found that in the really young children, so between the ages of 1 to 3, there might have been a slight difference in terms of them being smaller, but by the time they were older, that difference was no longer there with the children, when comparing the vegan children to omnivorous children. So I think even if it might be a slight issue when they're younger, when they're older, it doesn't seem to be a significant difference at all.
Thank you, Paula. There's also a question about tofu and calcium fortification. This is one that confuses, I think, so many people, because it is confusing. Does all tofu contain calcium, or is it just the ones that explicitly are calcium fortified and have it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it is quite confusing, isn't it? So the calcium set tofus definitely have the most calcium, so very high, like 400 to 500 milligrams per 100 grams. The Nigari ones are made with magnesium salts, but I believe they do still have a amount of calcium, but it's just a smaller. It is a smaller amount. So I know it can be confusing. So in the UK, brands like Cauldron are calcium set. If you look on the back and you see anything to do with calcium chloride, calcium carbonate, there sometimes are an E number, which is quite confusing as the sort of firming agent. E509 is the calcium chloride one, I think it is. So yeah, so if you just look on the back, those are the ones that are going to have the most calcium. But even the Nagari ones made from magnesium salts do still have some calcium. So, and of course, they're a good source of protein and iron as well.
No, that's very reassuring. Thank you. And there's a comment here about dairy. Dairy is the most common allergen leading to anaphylactic death in children in the British Isles. However, dairy is also an allergen that may trigger type 1 diabetes. Would you suggest avoiding dairy to reduce the risk of type 1 diabetes or reduce the risk of allergy? And because of this kind of, statistic.
Sure. So in terms of allergy prevention, avoiding an allergen is not usually recommended in terms of allergy prevention. In terms of the type 1 diabetes, yes, I have heard that statistic before, but I don't know a huge amount about that in terms of the link to type 1 diabetes. So I'm probably not the best person to answer that. But I would say, like I was saying with the allergens, that if you don't want to introduce it, it's better to not introduce it at all, as opposed to introducing sort of a little bit and then not giving it anymore. So if you feel that it's, as a family, it's not something you want to include, then absolutely fine. Just leave it off the table. And as I said, the most evidence we have in terms of allergy prevention is for peanuts. So that would definitely be one that I would recommend introducing.
And how about there was a question about in pregnancy, what's the latest sort of information on if you eat nuts, especially peanuts during pregnancy, does that protect your child from having nut allergies? What's the latest sort of research?
Yeah, sure. There used to be, as I'm sure you all know, a long time ago, this sort of idea that pregnant women should avoid nuts. So that has definitely been changed. So we recommend including them, but the evidence doesn't seem to be very strong whether you eat peanuts or not in terms of allergy prevention. So it doesn't seem to be a strong link in terms of eating peanuts when you're pregnant and preventing allergy. It seems to be much more important to actually introduce it to the infant when they start on foods.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to launch a quick poll. Sorry, Paula, we're just going quick fire with so many questions.
That's
there are a couple of questions more about omega-3.
Yeah, that's fine.
And is there a recommendation about alpha-linoleic acid consumption from 1 year over? Is there a minimum DHA requirement when looking at omega? What is this more important than an ALA contribution? So just a little bit more on omega-3. I think
Sure. Yeah, so great question. So in terms of DHA recommendations, for the recommendations are from around 1 year of age to give about 100 milligrams per day. In terms of ALA, I don't think there are specific, I'm just trying to think of some amounts that are recommended. Sorry, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Yes, sorry, I think there is like a minimum that is required in terms of percentage of energy that a child is having. And I would definitely recommend including those sources of, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, really nutritious foods to include. And ALA is an essential fats, and so I definitely would include that. We're just not sure exactly how much of the ALA is converted to DHA in infants and young children, particularly the under twos. So for pregnant and breastfeeding women and the under twos, I do recommend supplementing with DHA, just because we're not sure how much of that ALA is being converted. But I would definitely still recommend including things like those seeds and nuts, because they have lots of other health benefits in terms of including them.
Thank you. And I think this question is going to be of interest. It's about someone who's looking for a natural source of B12 for their toddler, they've seen that spirulina contains B12, but have recently read that the B12 in spirulina is pseudovitamin B12, and it's not been shown to be effective in humans. What would you say about people looking for a natural source of things like B12?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm not too sure about the safety of spirulina in children, particularly really, really young children. So yeah, I don't tend to recommend that. In terms of vitamin B12, there are a few different forms that it comes in, but it doesn't really matter on the exact form that it comes in. So perhaps Shireen can help me. I know there's the different forms of vitamin B12, but really I don't think that a sort of, I mean, if it's a fortified food, absolutely fine to include, and you can get your vitamin B12 from fortified foods. But I think for children, for everyone that's plant-based, but particularly for children, you know, we really want to make sure that they are getting enough vitamin B12. And so you know, we need to make sure that we are supplementing and giving them enough, because it's so important for the nervous system. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about the sort of form of it.
Yeah, I would say that probably cyanocobalamin, because it's more stable. And that's the one that you get in most supplements, like the veg one. That's the form in veg one and things. But I wouldn't fixate on what's natural or trying to find naturally derived. Sometimes you see supplements which are kind of natural multivitamin, that actually they're not really the same. And I think that sometimes can lead people to choosing really expensive, not tested
not tested. Exactly.
Check out. I know that you've got a lot of information, Paula, on in your Instagram about supplements, but we also have an entire supplement section on our website.
Yes, it's very helpful. Yeah,
people would ask for things about which supplements are soya-free or gluten-free or vegan, and obviously there's not going to be a perfect supplement, but but hopefully that gives you the starting point. Right, I think we got through pretty much all the big questions. There were some questions, and I would say that definitely reach out to Paula, Plant-Based Kids. She does work one-to-one and has helped hundreds of families navigate all of these challenges, and obviously nothing can really replace that one-to-one advice. But also do check out the kids area of our site and her book. If you do buy this book, please do leave a review on Amazon, because it really does help new authors, and it's such a brilliant book if you're working with people who are trying to feed their children more plants, which I think is pretty much most people now.
Most people, yeah, exactly.
And it's
thank you so much.
A really great read, and I think it delves even deeper than we did today into some of these topics. And thank you so much for everyone for listening. The comments were absolutely lovely, which does not surprise me at all. And I think you really emphasized, Paula, throughout how for children fats are so key. There are several comments in the chat about whole food plant-based diets not having oil, and you know, we need to all understand that what is necessarily right for some adults isn't appropriate for children, for growing.
Absolutely, yeah.
So thank you so much for emphasizing that and leading with the evidence. And yeah, it's such nice comments. Everyone says, all really interesting, wonderful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone
For joining. And again, if you'd like to access the recording, do consider joining us as a member, but you'll also get the slides and certificate in your inbox next week. And have a good evening, everyone. And thanks again, Paula, for a great session.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.